The summer sun poured over the tree-lined streets of Charlotte, North Carolina. Stephen Curry drove his rental car slowly through his childhood neighborhood. It had been years since he had last been there. The packed NBA schedule, commercial commitments, and his family responsibilities kept him constantly busy in California. But today was different. He was in town for a charity event that his foundation was organizing, and something pulled him back to his roots. "Am I arriving at the right place?" Stephen asked his personal assistant, Marcus, who was accompanying him. "Yes, according to the GPS, it's the next street on the right," Marcus responded, checking his phone. Steph's fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel. His heart raced as he approached the street where he grew up, where his father, Del Curry, then a player for the Charlotte Hornets, had raised his family. "We didn't notify anyone that we were coming, right? I want this to be a discreet visit," Steph confirmed. Marcus nodded. "Nobody knows. I got information about the current owners, but they have no idea you'll be showing up." The car turned the corner and there it was, the modest two-story house where Steph had developed his love for basketball, practicing for hours on end in the small backyard. The facade was different now, painted a light blue tone instead of the beige he remembered, and the front garden had been completely remodeled. Stephen parked across the street and observed the house in silence for a few minutes. "So many memories," he murmured, more to himself than to Marcus. "That old basketball hoop used to be right there." He pointed to the garage. "I spent hours and hours shooting, even when it rained. My father would get angry when I came back all soaked." The house seemed smaller than in his memories, as happens when adults revisit spaces from their childhood. While observing, he noticed movement in the house. A woman in her 40s came out to get the mail. Stephen took a deep breath. "Let's do this," he said, opening the car door. Marcus looked concerned. "Are you sure? They might not appreciate a surprise visit, even if it's from Stephen Curry." "I just want to see the place once more. Maybe talk with them a bit. I promise I won't disturb them." Stephen crossed the street, feeling the weight of each step. 20 years had passed since his family had moved. 20 years that had taken him from the garage of this simple house to NBA stardom, three-point, records, and multiple championships. The woman noticed him approaching and her eyes widened in recognition. "Good afternoon," said Stephen with his characteristic smile. "My name is Stephen Curry. I grew up in this house." "Oh my God," the woman responded, bringing her hand to her mouth. "Of course I know who you are. I'm Amanda Peterson. Our family has lived here for almost 10 years. "Nice to meet you, Amanda. Sorry to show up like this without warning. I'm in town for an event and felt the urge to see my old house." Amanda smiled widely. "What an incredible coincidence. My son Jackson is your #1 fan. He has posters of you all over his room, which, by chance, was your room when you lived here." Stephen's face lit up. "Really? That's amazing. Please, would you like to come in? Jackson is at school right now, but he would never forgive me if I didn't invite you to see the house." Stephen looked at Marcus, who nodded discreetly. "I'd love to, if it's not too much." "Trouble," Steph replied. Amanda opened the front door, and Stephen felt a wave of emotions as he crossed the threshold. The interior had been renovated, but the structure was the same. Memories began to flood his mind, running up the stairs, playing video games in the living room, helping his mother in the kitchen. "This is where it all began," said Stephen, his voice slightly choked. "Every dream, every goal I set, began within these walls." The smell of the house was different, but the light that came through the windows created the same patterns on the wooden floor that Stephen remembered from childhood. Amanda led him through the living room, now decorated with modern furniture, but with the same layout that Steph recognized. "The kitchen was remodeled a few years ago," explained Amanda as they walked, "but we kept the original structure." Stephen paused at the kitchen entrance, remembering Sunday mornings when his mother, Sonia, prepared breakfast, while his father, Del, read the newspaper. The Currys were a close-knit family, and that solid foundation had been fundamental for the development of Stephen and his siblings. "This is where my mother would serve us pancakes before games," he commented, smiling to himself. "She said we needed energy to shine on the court." Amanda smiled. "Your family is still fondly remembered in the neighborhood. The old residents always mention how the Currys were kind and approachable, despite your father's fame." Stephen nodded, absorbing those words. His father had always been his hero and role model, but hearing about the positive impact his family had left on the community deeply moved him. "Would you like to see the rest of the house?" Amanda asked. "Sure, if it's not a bother," Stephen replied. They climbed the stairs, and Stephen instantly remembered how he used to run up those steps, often jumping 2 at a time. In the upstairs hallway, he stopped in front of what had been his bedroom door. "This is Jackson's room now," said Amanda, opening the door. The room, as promised, was decorated with Steph Curry posters, Warriors uniforms, framed photographs of iconic games, and even a pair of Under Armour Curry shoes on a special shelf. But what really captured Stephen's attention was the painting on the wall, a perfect replica of the old backyard of the house, with the old basketball hoop where he practiced. "Jackson insisted on painting this when he discovered this was your room," explained Amanda. "He researched old photos of the house and found some where you could see the backyard. An artist friend helped us recreate the scene." Stephen approached the painting, touching it gently. "It's exactly how it was," he whispered. "Every detail. Even the mark on the tree where I used to measure my height every month." Next to the bed, there was a small table with an open scrapbook. Stephen approached and saw that it was a carefully assembled collection of newspaper and magazine articles about his career. "Jackson started this when he was 8 years old," explained Amanda. "He follows every game, every record. When we told him this was your former house, he didn't believe it initially. After we proved it, he became obsessed with learning everything about you and your journey." Stephen flipped through some pages of the scrapbook, seeing his career documented through the eyes of a young admirer. From his days at Davidson College to his difficult early years with the Warriors, the ankle injuries, to the NBA championships, and 3-point shooting records. "This is..." Stephen paused, feeling a lump in his throat. "This is very special." Amanda smiled. "Jackson says he wants to be like you when he grows up. Not just as a player, but as a person. He admires how you handle victories and defeats with the same grace." Stephen nodded, unable to speak for a moment as he processed the impact his journey had on young people like Jackson. In that room where he once dreamed of playing in the NBA, there was now another boy dreaming the same dreams, inspired by his trajectory. In the corner of the room, something caught his attention. A small mark on the wall near the baseboard. Stephen crouched down and ran his fingers over it. "This mark," he murmured. "I made this. It was my secret hiding spot." "Hiding spot?" asked Amanda, curious. Stephen smiled, remembering. "I had a small space behind this panel where I kept my most precious things. My first basketball card autographed by my father. A letter I wrote to myself about making it to the NBA." Amanda looked surprised. "Jackson never discovered that. Is the panel still there?" Stephen gently pressed on the area, and to his surprise, a small section of the baseboard moved, revealing a small hidden compartment. Stephen's heart raced when his fingers touched the inside of the hiding place. To his surprise, it wasn't empty. Carefully, he removed a yellowed envelope, folded and aged by time. "I can't believe it," whispered Stephen, holding the envelope as if it were a fragile treasure. "I thought I had taken everything when we moved." Amanda came closer, curious. "What is it?" Stephen turned the envelope in his hands. It was sealed and had his own name written in childish handwriting on the front, followed by "Open when you make it to the NBA." "It's a letter I wrote to myself when I was about 13 years old," he explained, his voice trembling. "It was an exercise my father suggested. He told me to write down my dreams and goals, seal the letter, and only open it when I achieved the biggest one." "And you never opened it," observed Amanda. Stephen shook his head. "I completely forgot about it in the confusion of moving. I must have left it here more than 20 years ago." Marcus, who was silently observing from the door, asked, "Are you going to open it now?" Stephen contemplated the envelope for a long moment. "I guess it's about time, isn't it?" Carefully, he opened the sealed envelope and unfolded a sheet of lined notebook paper filled with the writing of a determined teenager. Stephen began to read silently, but soon emotions took over. "Dear future Stephen," he began reading aloud, his voice choked. "If you're reading this, it means you made it. You reached the NBA, as you always dreamed. I hope you're playing for the Charlotte Hornets like Dad, but any team would be amazing." Stephen paused, wiping away a tear that escaped. Amanda discreetly offered a tissue. "I know, the path wasn't easy," he continued reading. "Everyone says I'm too short, too skinny. Coaches always pick the taller boys first. But Dad says it doesn't matter how big you are. What matters is heart, determination, and hard work. So, I hope you've kept those values." Stephen took a deep breath before continuing. "Sometimes I lie awake at night, imagining what it will be like. Will I have fans? Will children want my autograph like I want Michael Jordan's? Will I make my family proud? More than anything, I hope you, future Stephen, still love the game as much as I do now. That you still feel that joy when the ball goes through the net. That you still play like you're in the backyard at home, just for fun." Stephen's voice faltered on the last part. He needed a moment to compose himself. "One last thing. No matter where basketball takes you, remember where you came from. Remember this house, this room, that old hoop in the backyard. Remember Mom, Dad, Seth, and Sidel. And when things get tough, because Dad says they do, even for the best players, remember that kid who practiced in the rain and never gave up. That kid is you. That kid is me. And we never, ever give up. With love, 13-year-old Stephen." When he finished reading, Stephen could no longer contain his tears. They flowed freely down his face as he held that piece of his past, that innocent and sincere testimony of his childhood dreams. Amanda and Marcus remained in respectful silence, witnessing a profoundly intimate moment in the life of a superstar who rarely showed such vulnerability in public. "I forgot," Stephen finally said, his voice almost a whisper. "With the years, the championships, the records, sometimes I forget about that kid who just loved playing basketball." He looked around the room, at the posters and mementos of his career spread across the walls. The same career that had once been just a distant dream within those same walls. "He would be proud of you," Amanda said gently. Stephen smiled through his tears. "Thank you. This means a lot." While Stephen was still processing the emotion of reconnecting with his younger self through that letter, they heard the front door opening and a young voice calling, "Mom, I'm home early." Basketball practice was canceled because coach was sick. Amanda looked at Stephen with a surprised smile. "Looks like you're going to meet your #1 fan sooner than we expected." Hurried footsteps came up the stairs, and soon a boy of approximately 12 years appeared at the door. He froze instantly upon seeing Stephen Curry standing there, in the middle of his room. "Mom?" the boy stammered, his wide eyes fixed on his idol. Is that really him?" "Jackson, this is Stephen Curry," Amanda introduced, smiling at her son's reaction. "He lived in this house when he was about your age." Stephen, still emotional but quickly composing himself, extended his hand to the stunned boy. "Nice to meet you, Jackson. Your mother told me you're a big fan." Jackson seemed unable to move for a few seconds, as if in a trance. Finally, he stepped forward and shook Stephen's hand. I can't believe you're here. In my room. That used to be your room." The words came out fast and disconnected. "I have all your games recorded. I know all your statistics. I practice your shot every day in the backyard." Stephen smiled, recognizing in that enthusiasm his own love for the game when he was that age. "Jackson just got back from basketball practice," explained Amanda. "He plays on the school team." "What position?" asked Stephen. "Point guard," Jackson responded proudly. "Like you, although everyone says I'm too short." Stephen exchanged a meaningful look with Marcus, recalling what he had just read in his own letter. "You know," said Stephen, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder, "when I was your age, I was the smallest one on the team. Nobody bet on me." Jackson's eyes sparkled. "Really? But you became the greatest three-point shooter of all time." Stephen nodded. "And do you know how? By training when nobody was watching. By believing when nobody else did." He paused, holding the letter in his hands. "I just found something I wrote when I was about your age. A letter to my future self." Can I see it?" Jackson asked hesitantly. Stephen carefully folded the letter and put it in his pocket. "This one is very personal, but I can tell you what I learned from it. That dreams that seem impossible are exactly the ones worth fighting for." Jackson nodded intensely, absorbing every word. "Hey, how about we go outside?" Stephen suddenly suggested. "You said you practice shooting in the backyard, right? I'd like to see." Jackson's face lit up as if it were Christmas. "Really? You want to see me shoot?" "Of course," Stephen replied. "And maybe I can give you some tips." The four of them went downstairs and out to the backyard, which now had a modern basketball hoop in place of the old rim that Stephen used. Jackson ran to get his ball, while Stephen observed the space, noting how it was simultaneously different and familiar. For almost an hour, Stephen worked with Jackson, showing shooting techniques, sharing stories from his youth, and giving advice not just about basketball, but about perseverance and character. Amanda took photos discreetly, and Marcus watched with a smile, seeing his boss more relaxed and genuine than he had been in months. When it was finally time to leave, Jackson ran inside and came back with a basketball. "Mr. Curry, could you sign my ball? I promise I won't play with it afterward. I'll keep it forever." Stephen smiled. "Of course, but with one condition." "Anything," Jackson responded eagerly. "I want you to keep training hard, but I also want you to write a letter to yourself, like I did, about your dreams, your goals, who you want to become. And when you achieve those dreams, I want you to open it and remember the boy who started the journey." Jackson nodded solemnly. "I promise." Stephen autographed the ball, and then took a picture with the family. Before leaving, he took a new pair of shoes from his Under Armour line from the trunk of his car. "These are from my new model, not yet released," he explained, handing them to Jackson. "I hope they help you achieve your dreams." As they said goodbye, Stephen took the letter from his pocket and looked at it once more, before turning his attention back to the house that had shaped his childhood. "Thank you for this," he said to Amanda. "You have no idea how much this meant to me today." Back in the car with Marcus, Stephen remained silent for several minutes as they drove away from the neighborhood. "Are you okay?" Marcus finally asked. Stephen nodded, a serenity on his face. "Better than I've been in a long time. Sometimes we need to look back to remember why we started, to move forward with renewed purpose." As the car turned the corner, Stephen looked one last time in the rearview mirror at his old house, now smaller in the distance but bigger than ever in his heart.